I'm Jessica Marslick from the Courier Mail, and it's my pleasure to welcome the Attorney General to speak with us today. The Honourable Shannon Fentiman is Attorney General and Minister for Justice, Minister for Women, Minister for the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence, and the Ministerial Champion for the Torres Strait. She was elected to the Queensland Parliament in 2015 as the member for Waterford. A strong advocate for social justice, the Attorney General is committed to ensuring all Queenslanders have access to justice and equality before the law. She plans to use this term as Attorney General to review, modernise and update laws so they better reflect Queensland's diversity and evolving social framework. She holds a Bachelor of Laws and a Master of Laws. She was admitted as a legal practitioner in 2007 and has worked as an employment lawyer prior to her election to Parliament. Please welcome the Attorney General to the stage.
Well, thank you all very much for coming along today. I'm delighted to be with you. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This area, Meanjin, now known as Brisbane, was a place where the Turrbal and Yagara peoples had held ceremonies of welcome and shared knowledge, so it's wonderful that we can continue those traditions today. Can I acknowledge Peter Kelly, thank you so much, and Jess Marslick. Jess, I note you're the outgoing president of the Press Gallery, and I also want to congratulate Marlena Watt from 7 News on being elected the new gallery president. I understand Marlena's at home recovering from COVID. Having just come through it, I really hope she gets through it and has a speedy recovery. Can I also acknowledge all of the sector workers and especially people with lived experience of victim survivors of domestic, family and sexual violence. I know the Media Club is about hearing from your guest speaker, and I am honoured to be invited to talk with you about the turning point we are at on gendered violence, cultural change and coercive control. And I'm delighted to be back in a portfolio that I am so deeply passionate about. Like you, I have witnessed the significant advancements in community sentiment about domestic, family and sexual violence, and I feel incredibly privileged to take on the challenge of modernising and reforming our justice system to reflect this shift. But first, I want to start by acknowledging you, the media. Reporting on domestic and family violence incidents takes a huge toll on journalists, but it's rarely talked about. What you see at a crime scene or hear in a court case is not easy, to say the least, so thank you. There is no doubt that reporting on domestic violence has played a huge role in changing community attitudes and raising awareness. It's so important to recognise we have come such a long way. In fact, there was a time not too long ago when it wasn't covered by the press at all, and journalists would remember being told to leave a crime scene because it was just a domestic. But there are areas together we can improve on. As journalist Jane Gilmore has said during her 7-year Fixed It campaign, the only context in which I have seen the lies told by criminals regularly repeated without context is headlines in the reports about men's violence against women. The media has a responsibility to not only avoid further traumatising victims, but also to understand how their stories can be used by perpetrators themselves. The UQ School of Law submitted to the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force, in the context of dowsing as a form of domestic and family violence, there is evidence that perpetrators have used the killings of Hannah Clark and Kelly Wilkinson to make threats against and control partners and ex-partners. Some anecdotal evidence in our research further suggests that media reporting may lead to copycatting by perpetrators. Now, I want to be very clear. We need you to keep reporting these stories. But I also know that everyone in this room is keen to work together to minimise any further risk to women. As the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force recommended, we're about to start reviewing and updating media guidelines to ensure that further advice is available to journalists, and we will do this in partnership with you. Just like the media reports on suicides in a very sensitive way, I'm eager to continue to improve the coverage of domestic violence by maintaining an open discussion with the industry. Together we can find the right balance to make a real difference. Today, I also want to ensure that you hear from survivors, the brave women who have told their stories to the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force. They did so with great difficulty, but also great generosity. They shared their experience so that others might avoid it. Margaret McMurdo called it recentering women's voices, and their experiences have been heard and are always at the centre of everything we do in this space. So let's start today with perhaps the most reluctant but effective champions of this cause, Sue and Lloyd Clark, who still live with the trauma of their devastating loss every day. They told the task force, "We believe there has been a very significant upswing in community awareness of coercive control and support for its prohibition in the 16 months since Hannah, Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey were taken from us. We have to admit, we did not understand coercive control even as our family was dealing with it on a daily basis. We knew that something was wrong with the behaviour, and we certainly knew Hannah deserved so much better from her husband. We didn't understand that this bad behaviour had a name, could be codified, and should be illegal. And of course, we didn't know where it was leading. Even Hannah was not fully aware of the term coercive control, even though she was fully aware of its consequences. She feared for her safety, and her fears were proved correct. Coercive control is a pattern of behaviours perpetrated against a person to create fear, isolation, intimidation, and humiliation. It can be hard to detect, report, and protect from, particularly if we do not listen to the person experiencing it. Behaviours can include restricting movement and isolating from family and friends, monitoring a partner physically, electronically, or through others, demanding constant check-ins and harassing friends to check up on a victim, loading up with tasks in the home to prevent any time for social or work activity, depriving the victim of sleep to confuse or disorient them, threatening self-harm, turning children against the victim, controlling access to children, harm or threats of harm to children, or using the children to spy and report on the victim, threatening harm to pets, harassing the victim at work, preventing the practice of religion, threatening visa or immigration status, jealousy and constant accusations of infidelity, regulating food and exercise and controlling what the victim wears, reproductive control, forced sexual activity, and sharing intimate images without consent. It is an exhausting but not exhaustive list. Imagine living it for years. It's an all-consuming, relentless pattern of behaviour by manipulative perpetrators who gaslight and redefine a victim's reality. And it can be done without any physical contact. As one woman told the task force, "I was a victim of domestic violence, though I didn't know it until Alison Baden-Clay's detective said on TV, 'You don't have to have a black eye to be a victim.'" So imagine trying to leave or seek protection when you've lost most of your life skills, you have no access to money or safe communication, you have very few friends left, and no one understands that what you are describing is domestic violence. We must change this. The system needs to be geared up to intervene earlier, shifting away from only responding to individual instances of physical violence. To put it another way, we need to respond to the red flags well before the blue police tape surrounds another family home. That requires expanding our community's understanding of what domestic, family and sexual violence is and what it looks like, giving them the knowledge to recognise these behaviours as control and the language to call it out before it's too late. We have to hear what women are saying. The shocking things you see on the news seldom started that day. It is incredibly rare, despite what is sometimes in the headlines, that a good man just snapped. In fact, coercive control is the most common factor leading to intimate partner homicide. Most often, it is the culmination of deliberate, strategic behaviour over time. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, aren't men victims of violence too? And the simple answer is yes, absolutely. We know that women commit acts of violence, manipulation, and control. But let me be clear. The statistics tell us that 95% of victims are women and they experience abuse at the hands of men. That may not often be a popular position on social media, but that is the reality that we all must face. And we have to treat this as gendered violence if we are to have any success of eliminating it. Let me again return to the stories of survivors. One woman told the task force, the magistrate said he, the perpetrator, was a pest, but wasn't violent enough to be locked up. He breached bail and the DVO 7 times, and I know he's not finished with me. Our justice system must adjust to be trauma-informed and responsive to the impacts of this trauma on women's capacity to seek protection and safety. Put simply, victims attending court need to know that the experience won't further traumatise them. This means radically changing our courthouses, and we're investing $166 million to upgrade and improve facilities, including specialist courts and safe spaces for women. It means funding to the support services, and we provided an additional $30 million to the sector, and we're continuing to work with our services to understand the pressures that they're facing. And we're investing $32 million into high-risk teams to support them in additional locations. These teams rally around women who are most at risk and support them in ways such as finding a safe place to live, counselling support, and health services. You can talk about dollars, but it does downplay, I think, the significance. The point is we are investing in the programs that we know will work. And on top of these initiatives, we are progressing amendments that prevent perpetrators from cross-examining their victim, and we're modernising the offence of unlawful stalking. We know perpetrators are getting smarter and they're using technology to track partners' movements and monitor text messages. That's why we will make sure that the offence of unlawful stalking includes the use of technology, such as monitoring a person's location via their phone, and offenders will receive tougher sentences. We will also reduce the requirement for victim survivors to retell their stories through the use of police body-worn camera footage in court. Recent amendments to the Evidence Act provide a framework for a pilot that allow video statements taken by trained police officers to be admissible as a survivor's evidence-in-chief in criminal proceedings. Using video footage that is taken immediately and not having to go back or attend a station and make a statement takes away a significant opportunity for the perpetrator to intimidate the victim and prevent them from giving a statement. It's also so important that we look at ways to improve the police response to the behaviour and tactics employed by perpetrators. One woman told the task force about a less than satisfactory interaction with police. I eventually was present for a strangulation that occurred to my child. I took the children to the police station after they all reported to me that he strangles all of them when they are naughty. The police ruled there was not enough evidence and that I was probably raised by me out of anger due to separation. I'm incredibly proud that we have established a commission of inquiry to examine Queensland Police Service responses to domestic and family violence. There is no doubt domestic and family violence is the biggest issue that police deal with, and it gets more confronting and more complex every day. But we have to do better. Every woman, no matter where she lives, no matter what police station she attends, must be heard and listened to. The Queensland Police Service have acknowledged recent victims who have not received a level of service that they are aiming to provide, and I am very pleased that the QPS has welcomed this opportunity to understand and reflect on what they can do better to protect victims. It's a huge responsibility, and police cannot do it alone. That's why we've committed another $30 million to expand what's known as a co-responder model. In the model, support services, domestic violence services, attend call-outs and crime scenes along with police, helping provide the best advice and support to a victim at the time when they are most vulnerable. One of the recommendations of the task force was the need to look at intimate relationships as a whole, instead of focusing on an individual, single violent incident, so that the person who is most at need of protection in the relationship gets that protection. A recent report by the DV Death Review Board found every First Nations woman who was a homicide victim had a prior history of also being recorded as a perpetrator. The justice system can be a particularly complex place for First Nations people, and in part, the way that the system currently works contributes to overrepresentation. And we have to be extremely aware of that as we legislate and reform to prevent coercive control. That's why we're establishing a First Nations Justice Office to lead a First Nations Law Office to provide high-level guidance each and every step of the way to avoid unintended consequences. The package of reforms announced in response to the first report of the task force also included funding to support perpetrator programs specifically tailored to meet the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including a healing approach and connection to culture. And the ongoing work of the task force includes consideration of women as offenders and the intersection between trauma and offending. The task force also identified the need to work more with men. As one perpetrator submitted, I learnt how to communicate properly, how to see things from other people's perspectives, what respect looks like, how to control and understand my feelings. Of course, we have to keep the victim survivor's experience and their safety at the centre of what we do, but we must also make sure that perpetrators are held accountable for their actions and high-risk offenders are stopped from moving on from victim to victim. Importantly, we've committed another $25 million for perpetrator programs to change men's behaviour and to stop the cycle of violence. And we will continue to trial innovative ways to hold perpetrators to account, like the Family Pathways program. It works with young men, with their mums, to assist them to understand and address violent behaviours and to rebuild respect between mothers and sons. I've had the immense privilege to sit in on a session of this program and observed for myself the incredible difference it can make to intervene earlier. We're working with these boys before they even enter an intimate partner relationship, and that's how we stop the cycle of violence. Many of these young men have witnessed their father's violence, but with guidance, we can help them unlearn these problematic behaviours. We can also break the cycle by harnessing our community, starting by working with young people. And unfortunately, it seems we have a way to go. We know that more than 1 in 5 young men think men should take control of relationships and be the head of a household. Over 2 in 5 young Australians support the statement, I think it's natural for a man to want to appear in control of his partner in front of his male friends. And recent data tells us that 36% of DV offenders in Queensland are aged under 30. We're combating this by making sure that every young person in Queensland is getting respectful relationships education in our schools. And more broadly, we're working with sporting, community and cultural leaders to encourage safe environments. We're backing programs like We Need to Talk, an initiative run by Sue Clark, who has been using Hannah's tragic story to talk to teenage girls and their mums about some of the subtle warning signs of controlling behaviour. And we also partner with programs like R for Respect, who empower young people to create and share their own messages that promote respect. Violence against women occurs in an environment where women are not respected and valued. And I really want you to listen to this. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index paints a grim picture of how we're tracking here in this country. Because in terms of gender equality, Australia is ranked 50th in the world, behind the United States, Serbia, Mozambique, and Croatia. So despite significant advances, gender inequality persists And women are still seen as weak, women's work is not valued, and women's voices are not heard in all the places where decisions are made. But I do have renewed hope with a new federal government who have already committed to universal, affordable, high-quality childcare and uplifting the conditions for staff in aged care. Enabling economic security and addressing the gender pay gap are vital steps in reducing violence against women, and they are the central focus of our new women's strategy for Queensland. Ending violence against women requires persistent action at many levels and in many settings, but I don't want you to leave here today feeling helpless. Instead, I want you to leave here feeling full of hope. Yes, the task is enormous, but it is achievable. The scale of reform and modernisation Queensland is undergoing is huge, and we're taking big steps in the right direction. We are continuing the process of bringing violence out from behind closed doors. It is no longer considered a private matter to turn a blind eye to. We see physical violence and we see that it is wrong. Now it is time to see, describe and act on the other insidious behaviours. We have led the way since 2015, and we are continuing to push further and broader as we shake up the systems that women should be able to trust to access a safe and successful life. If we all play our part, all of us together can fundamentally change the system for the better. Thank you.
I can't walk that fast these days. Thank you so much for that speech. Obviously, a lot of the reforms you just detailed come out of the McMurdo review, and there's a lot of work ahead of you. One of the things, I guess, out of your control, though, is often raised by victims is family law. And you mentioned the incoming Albanese government. We've spoken before about, you believe that there's a need to look at that. Can you tell us what conversations you hope to have with the new government around pushing for reviews in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. It is still, I think, the biggest issue that women raise with me. And it is also one of the biggest issues that services raise with me. And I have had the opportunity to already talk to Mark Dreyfus, our new Attorney General. Before he became the Attorney General, he was up in Queensland just before the election and sat down with Women's Legal Service. He's a big supporter of that organisation. And we did talk about just how big the scale of the issue is at the family court. And he is very passionate about reform. One of the recommendations from the task force was that the state government continue to advocate to change the system. It needs more resources, but fundamentally there needs to be a whole lot of policy and training at the family court to really understand gendered violence and how perpetrators manipulate, again, the system. So, like we're doing here in Queensland, transforming a huge criminal justice system to be trauma-informed and understand the nature of this violence, the same needs to happen at the family court.
On another issue that's dominated news in the past week, there's now 40,000 plus signatures to a petition to appeal the sentence handed down to the young man who was driving a car that killed Maddie Field and Kate Ledbetter. Can you tell us where you are there with a possible appeal of that sentence, which will see him released after 6 years jail?
Yeah, clearly the community have responded, and it's very clear that the community doesn't believe that this sentence reflects community attitudes. And I mean, it was just horrific and tragic to see Matt and Kate and their unborn child killed in such a way. And I know it's been devastating for the family, for the friends, but the entire Queensland community. So the process is that I seek advice from the Director of Public Prosecutions. I should get that advice this week. As I've said, and I want to reassure all of you, the family and the community, if there are grounds for appeal, I will make that appeal.
And just a question that should appeal to the business community here. There's been a long promised review of workplace surveillance laws that was promised something like 4 years ago now, and I know there's a lot on their plate, but the Queensland Law Reform Commission still haven't finished that there. Can you talk to us about where that's at and whether we will see reform in that space in this term of government?
Yeah, we will. There is a lot of reform happening, and the Queensland Law Reform are currently considering deregulation of the sex work industry and then mining leases objections, but then they will finalise workplace surveillance. In the meantime, we're cracking on and progressing law reform in the area of privacy and particularly how government handles data, which is a really important issue. And then the Law Reform Commission will complete the workplace surveillance review, and then we'll have a look at that. So it has been postponed because of these other priorities, but I know it is a big issue and we will get to it.
And any information about when the RTI terms of reference should come out to look at those?
I know I've been telling you very soon for many months now, but I promise you it's very soon.
If I can throw to my colleagues in the media gallery, I'll call on Lydia Lynch from The Australian to begin us.
Hello. Oh, I didn't think it'd be on. Hello, everyone. Question on the independent inquiry into Star Entertainment and whether it's fit to hold casino licences here in Queensland. Will that inquiry hold public hearings, and will it be given compulsion powers to ensure that Star executives who have already resigned will still have to front up and give evidence?
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. So here in Queensland, the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation, OLGR, have been undertaking investigations along with the Queensland Police and AUSTRAC, the federal regulator, into the very concerning allegations that we've seen emerge in Sydney. There is currently a commission of inquiry in New South Wales, the Bell inquiry. Those terms of reference specifically include for that inquiry to look at not just Star Sydney but Star Group, which is the same company with the same executives that operate casinos here in Queensland. So we're intending to build on what's happening in New South Wales with the Bell inquiry. OLGR have now got to a point in their investigations where they do think we need an independent expert review to look at the ongoing suitability of Star to hold a casino licence. So those terms of reference and public hearings and compulsion powers, Lydia, will be released next week. We're still finalising those terms of reference, and the reviewer will be announced as well. But very clearly, we're basically going to accept the findings of the Bell inquiry in New South Wales because they're dealing with the same company, and we need to now put that in the Queensland context about their ongoing suitability. So we'll get those terms of reference and the reviewer next week. But certainly we have been taking this very seriously, and of course I introduced the Casino Control Bill last week. Our casino regulation was kind of written in the 80s, and it does really need one of those other pieces of legislation that desperately needs modernisation. And the new bill will allow us to, go after casinos for non-compliance. There'll be disciplinary action and pecuniary penalties up to $50 million, which is not something we have the power to do now. So I'm also really pleased to see that we're cracking on and really strengthening our regulation here in Queensland.
Rachel Rieger from the ABC.
Just following on from those questions, what will happen if Star is found not to be suitable to hold a casino licence in Queensland, and why did it take the government so long to announce an independent review given what we did see in New South Wales?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. So, as I said, there have been investigations ongoing since last year, and then New South Wales announced their inquiry, which is investigating the same company. So we're going to wait for that inquiry to play out, and we've now reached the stage where we want to have our own review into the suitability of Star to hold a licence. Similarly to what's happened in Victoria and WA with Crown, Crown was found to not be suitable to hold a licence. They have given Crown a temporary 2-year licence on the condition that they meet all of the expectations of the regulator, and they've put in place a special manager basically to oversee every aspect of the operation of Crown casinos. So even if, and I'm not going to preempt any of the findings of a review, but even if a casino is found to not be suitable, there are things we can put in place provisionally to make sure that they do meet all of the expectations of the regulator and the community.
Jack Mackay of the Courier Mail.
Thank you. Last week, the Tasmanian government announced that it was raising the minimum age of detention from 10 to 14. Is this something that the Queensland government will consider? And also, Where do you personally stand on the age of criminal responsibility? Do you think 10 is too young?
Thank you, Jack. Yes, I did see that announcement from Tasmania. So they're lifting the age of detention. Here in Queensland, very few young people, particularly aged 10 to 12, actually are in detention. But I think it is an interesting reform to look at. Our meeting of Attorneys General nationally have supported, in principle, raising the age to 12. And there's a lot of work being done in each jurisdiction now to look at what that would look like, what services we would need to move from the justice system to communities, what would need to happen to do that. We are all, I think, on the same page that we want consistency in our laws. So where possible, we want every jurisdiction to go perhaps to 12, and then, if we can look more broadly at 14. But I think in the first instance, we want to move together. Bob Atkinson, who led the Youth Justice Review, that was his recommendation, that perhaps we could move to 12 as part of a national approach. Again, we haven't had a meeting of Attorneys General yet with the new Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, but I know he is very interested in this, and perhaps we'll get some leadership from the federal government on this issue as well, which would help. So the discussions are ongoing. Very happy to look at Tasmania's approach, which is looking at detention, not responsibility.
So do you think 10's too young, though? That's in your personal view?
For minimum age of criminal responsibility?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, look, we're all pushing to get to 12. I mean, every jurisdiction has now accepted that we'd like to get to 12 as part of a national approach. So that's really, our position.
Laura Dimmick from Network 7.
Hello. You're an advocate for women in leadership. Do you have aspirations to be Premier one day?
I have to be completely honest. Like this is my dream job. If you had told me back when I was a law student, or working as a solicitor, that I would be the Attorney General and the Minister for Women and Prevention of Violence, like I could not have imagined the opportunities. I'm more concerned about getting everything I want to get done in this term of government in this job and not wasting a moment. So I'm very happy doing what I'm doing, and it's keeping me very busy. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. I mean, the fact that we got to set up a Women's Safety and Justice Task Force and look at changing the entire criminal justice system, I could not have imagined having that opportunity. So I'm pretty happy doing what I'm doing.
But you're not ruling it out.
Well, I guess not. But I don't even have the brain space to think about that, Laura, is what I'm genuinely telling you.
Jacob Chico from Network 10.
Just back to the crash that the sentencing that was handed down last week over the Alexandra Hills crash. I understand there's that appeal process, but do you agree with the greater calls that there needs to be urgent changes to the Youth Justice Act?
Well, I think since that case, we have made changes, like significant changes to the Youth Justice Act. So we've actually reversed the onus of proof, like reversed the presumption that a young person in the Juvenile Justice Act will get bail. We've reversed that for serious offences like the one that this young man faced. So many more young offenders who are committing serious offences are not getting bail. They're in detention. And I think that is the most effective way to keep the community safe. I mean, I know the opposition are saying we need to reintroduce the offence of breach of bail. Can I just tell you, that absolutely failed. I think 185 young people were convicted of breach of bail, and I just want to explain to you, you have to get convicted of, the criminal offence you've been charged with. So at the very end of the process, if you're found guilty, then you're found guilty of breaching bail. There's no additional penalty, and out of the 185 kids that were convicted of breach of bail, 90% of them reoffended within 12 months. That's not the answer. I think the community genuinely, and quite rightly, don't want to see young people who commit serious offences getting bail. And that's what we've done through our legislation, to reverse the presumption that they will get bail. And many more of them now are in detention. But, I mean, if there was an easy way to solve youth crime, gosh, we would do it in a heartbeat. It is actually genuinely complex. You're working with families that are experiencing domestic and family violence, have mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues. There's obviously a lot of these kids have cognitive impairments. They're probably not screened early enough. They're probably not getting the supports they need. That's no excuse for the community wanting to feel safe. But I believe our changes to the Youth Justice Act are making sure that less of these young offenders are on the streets. And I think that is a really, genuinely making a difference to community safety. And in terms of the sentence, again, as I said, if there are any grounds to appeal, I'll take that appeal.
In your view, though, what further changes are needed to ensure that sentences are adequate to begin with and there might not be any need for appeals?
Well, this sentence was interesting. So the judge found that the crime was heinous and therefore there could have been a higher penalty than 10 years. But at the end of the day, the sentence that was handed down was 10 years, eligible for parole after 6. And clearly, the community have said very, very clearly that does not reflect their community expectations and attitudes. So, as I say, if there are grounds for appeal, I'll absolutely take that appeal.
Cameron Atfield from Brisbane Times. No? No there. I'll go to Sarah Petty from The Australian then.
Hello. Queensland is in the middle of its second review of sexual consent laws in 3 years. The affirmative model, consent model is already adopted in a number of other states, led by New South Wales. Do you believe consent laws need to be uniformed across the nation?
I genuinely believe that where you can get uniformity across jurisdictions, you should. Criminal law is a little bit complicated, particularly because there are different systems. So Queensland is a code system, New South Wales and Victoria are common law systems. So it is tricky to try and get uniformity when it comes to criminal law. But where we can, I believe we should. I made it very clear that I wanted the task force to specifically look at affirmative consent. I think things have moved along. I think the community now, are a lot more comfortable with the idea of affirmative consent. New South Wales have just introduced affirmative consent and have some fantastic community awareness videos of what it means. Like, really excellent. I've said to my team, if we do go down this path, we absolutely need to talk to New South Wales about what they're doing down there in terms of the community education. Look, I think where we can have uniformity, we should. I'm very interested to see what the task force comes back with in terms of affirmative consent. I do think the community have moved on and I'm very supportive of that kind of model when it comes to consent and mistake of fact.
Any more questions from the media? In that case, please join me in thanking the Attorney General.